These mountains in Canada were once described by a native Indian as a great tidal wave of stone above the horizon. They are the Rocky Mountains, stretching for 3,000 miles across the North American continent, still some of the wildest land on the planet. I could walk for 100 days here without encountering a single person. In fact, it's still possible to walk in places where no one has set foot before.
As far as I'm concerned, the only way to truly appreciate a landscape as magnificent as this one is to hike deep into the backcountry. The pristine wilderness here is a backpacker's paradise, but only if you know what you're doing. Too many people come here ill-prepared, only to find themselves pushed to the limits of survival and endurance.
Make no mistake, at any time of the year this is an extreme environment. Mountain climates inevitably mean unpredictable weather. Last July, 12 inches of snow fell on what started out as a balmy summer's day. All too often, hikers get caught out by the Rockies' fickle weather.
Most people who come hiking into these backcountry areas consider grizzly bears to be their greatest threat. But in fact, if you do a risk assessment, hypothermia is by far and away the biggest danger here. That means that if you get lost, you may have to build a shelter. Now, we're in the mountains, it's autumn. Whatever shelter we build has to be able to cope with the worst that nature can throw at us. This is the site I've chosen for my shelter. I've got a couple of really good trees here to support a ridgepole, behind which I can lean a roof and thatch that. Underneath the roof, I'm going to build a raised bed that I can sit on and which will keep me up off of the cold ground. Now, this type of shelter is a real classic in the subarctic forest, but it requires two key factors. One is a good cutting tool like an axe, and the other is an abundance of firewood.
I'm going to lash the shelter together with spruce roots, which are flexible and strong. They serve as the backwoodsman's wire. I'm building a shelter in which I can stretch out, allowing my whole body to be warmed by a long log fire.
Shelter building always takes a lot of work. If you're going to do it right the first time. Take your time, don't rush and injure yourself, and be organised. When I trimmed off these rafters, I did it here, so that all these boughs were available, ready for me now for thatching, which is the next job. The spruce boughs make a really waterproof thatching, but to make them go further, I'm thatching from ground level to body height using moss, because nothing below that level needs to be waterproof. The moss is much easier and quicker to put on. Well, that's the shelter finished. You can see how steep the roof has to be to ensure that it will shed the heaviest rain. On the bed, I've laid some extra spruce boughs for comfort, with a thickness here that acts as a pillow. But this shelter really comes into its own when I light a fire in front of it, because then I can sleep in it without a sleeping bag.
The paradox of fire making is the greater the need, the more difficult it usually is. If the forest is wet, feather sticks are the best option. Shave them from the dry inside of dead standing timber.
In survival, there's a right way and a wrong way of doing almost everything, including simple tasks like lighting a match. Some people strike their matches like this, pushing with their thumb. But if your hands are cold or you're very tired, that can happen. The match breaks. Other people strike their matches like this, pushing with their index finger. But the same thing can happen. If it's your last match and your life depends upon it, you better do it right. Hold the match like this, support the head while you strike it, bring it into your cupped hands to protect it from the wind, and when it's good and strong, take the flame to your kindling.
Resin is very flammable and burns for a long time. It's an excellent material for candle making.
You can see how the shelter works. I've got a long fire that warms my body from head to toe. With this system, I can sleep out in temperatures as low as -50 without the need for a sleeping bag.
Mornings in these deep valleys are bitterly cold. It takes a long time for the sun's warmth to reach the valley floor, so it's always nice to have a cooked breakfast. Last night I left a fishing line baited with grasshoppers in the lake. One of my favourite ways of cooking fish is just to steam them in moss straight on top of a fire.
A couple of whitefish are a real bonus out here, but of course I'm cooking them well away from my campsite, because if there's one food that bears value above others, it's fish. It's always good advice when you come into the bear country to play by the bear's rules. Don't eat where you sleep, don't store your food or cosmetics or even clothes that you may have spilled food on at your campsite. Instead, put them in a bag, put them up in the trees, at least a quarter of a mile from your campsite.
One of the keys to enjoying the backcountry in safety is learning to make the right decisions. In this environment, that means understanding how your body responds to the cold, so you're able to take the appropriate actions to prevent hypothermia. One of the world's leading hypothermia research centres is the Defence and Civil Institute for Environmental Medicine in Toronto.